Next, I want to talk about why. Why does someone need title insurance? And when I'm at the kitchen table with the seller, they go, well, I've paid my carpet guy, I don't have any IRS liens. Why do I need insurance? But from the buyer point of view, they don't know the seller, right? But
That's right.
Anyway, why
Okay.
title insurance? Why is that important?
Okay, this could probably take 2
Yeah,
hours.
and we might have some examples, right?
We have a long list of examples, so I'll just give you a few, but the thing is, the seller doesn't really know everything that happened on their property either, because they haven't always owned it.
Right.
There were other owners before that, and there might have been a forgery on a deed 3 owners back, and suddenly an error, or somebody else finds that out many years down the road. So the title insurance, traditionally in Colorado, the seller pays for the policy that insures the buyer, though the buyer might also pay for that sometimes. But it's actually protecting the seller as much as the buyer, because if the problem occurs later or comes to light later, then if there was no title insurance, I'm sure that the buyer would go after the seller. With the title company insuring the title, we step into that middle and we'll pay claims on anything that might have happened prior to closing. And so I mentioned a forgery on a deed or some other thing that might have happened, mental incompetence.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. We insure even mental incompetence. So if a seller had, or somewhere along the line even, a party had signed the documents and later one of their children says, well, mom had Alzheimer's.
Right.
She wasn't competent to be signing documents, so we want our money. So that's one example. But also there are situations where the seller might have gone out the day before closing and borrowed a second mortgage and didn't tell anybody about it, and it will be days before that shows up in the public records. So we're all assuming there's no liens. We've done our best due diligence to determine that the title was good on the day of closing, but they may not have told us.
Right.
So after closing, they're long gone, and the buyer finds out, whoops, there's one more lien. So the title company, that would be a claim that they would pay on that.
Okay. You have one more example?
I have one more.
Okay.
I have probably 20, but I'll stop.
Yeah,
One more is
good.
the situation where there might be a false impersonation. At the closing table, I'm going to guess that a realtor has probably never asked the sellers for their IDs. You don't really know who you're working with. And so we ask for that at closing. The closer will do that. And sometimes those are fake. We do the best we can to determine that they're really who they say they are. But we had a situation a few years ago where a husband and wife came to the closing, signed all the documents, left, and the buyer moved in, they got their title policy, and the lender got their policy, and about 6 months later, the real wife appeared. So she says, that was my house, and we can't find him and his fake wife who came to the closing.
Wow.
So there's a situation
where the title company stepped in to pay.
Right.
Well, one example I wanted to share was a survey one, because it's funny now, it wasn't funny at the time, but I sold a house that the garage with the ILC, the improvement location certificate, showed the garage on the property. And then the day after closing, the neighbor knocked on the door with another survey showing the garage off the property. So immediate conflict, and the title company jumped in and they did solve the issue, the expense of, well, one of the expenses was they cut off the garage, made a big gap and made a shed on the other owner's property. That's how it was taken care of physically, but still the whole process was probably maybe a $20,000 loss to the title company.
Sure.
So another example of how they might kick in. So
Right.
a little different than when a house burns down. It's pretty self-explanatory, but
Well, yes.
title's a little bit different.
It is a little different, yeah.
Okay, next is who are title insurance company, and like who pays a claim when there is a claim?
Okay. Well, title companies that you might walk in their front door and do your closing at, it could be an agency, which there could be a real small operation. In fact, 2 or 3 people work there, and they have the ability to be underwritten by several different companies who actually pay the claims. The underwriter is most important for your insurance. Then there are also companies that are direct to operations of their underwriter. So both kinds, they're both fine. If you go to a small company that you aren't familiar with, it's most important to find out who their underwriter is, because there are some really large ones out there, and there are some smaller ones you might not trust. But an example, some of the larger ones, most reputable in the country are Fidelity, which is the largest, and First American, there's Old Republic Title, and then there are a number more. I shouldn't have started the list because I'm gonna leave a whole lot of them out. But I would check the reputation of the underwriter.
Okay, so that's
Because
most
then,
important.
yes, because even if that mom and pop little operation went out of business, you'd still have a policy that's guaranteed by a large company. And I'll just, this is my personal commercial here, Fidelity has $1.6 billion in reserves to pay claims.
Wow,
So you know that if you have your $10,000 or $20,000 claim,
they're gonna be
they're
there.
gonna take care of it, yes.
Okay, fantastic. So, any other thoughts on working with smaller agencies versus bigger ones, or?
I would say, as far as sellers, buyers, and realtors go, probably the most important part of the transaction, at least it feels like, is the closing. So it's most important for you to do business with a company that you trust the closing staff, who can get the job done, so you look good to your
Okay.
client, so the client gets paid, and everything works just like it should.
Well, a few years back, the Colorado Real Estate Commission added a clause in our contracts to let the buyer potentially select the title company, and then in that same clause is where it says the buyer would also pay for it. Did that come about because buyers were getting title policies from companies that went down during the downturn, or?
I
Do you have any
don't
thoughts on that?
believe that was the reason. I would say it's more consumer protection, probably making sure that the buyer's getting what they want. A lot of times people will shop for the pricing on title insurance, and that could be a factor, why, or maybe a buyer has a relative who works for a title company, they just wanna
Right.
work with them. But shopping is not a very effective way, as you know. Most of our rates are pretty close to one another.
Right.
In fact, I'll just talk a little about rates.
Well, that's our next topic, is the cost of title insurance.
Yes,
So
indeed, okay.
that's perfect
So,
segue.
Yes, well, speaking of consumer protection,
Right.
title companies are required to file our rates with the state of Colorado, Department of Regulatory Agencies, and they are quite strict with us title companies. They make sure, when we do a filing, they want to make sure that we're not charging too much. They're all about consumer protection. And so, so we are allowed to charge more than it would cost us to do the business, basically, with some margin for profit in there, of course. But the price of the title insurance usually varies from one company to the next pretty minimally, though we do have different kinds of discounts. If the seller has owned property for less than 5 years, for instance, my company offers a graduated discount up to the 5th year. Some are different, so you might shop that. But as far as, you know, I would say $20, $30, $40 difference is pretty much what you're running to most of the time.
Okay.
So if you have a good relationship with somebody, it may be worth paying $20 more.
Right.
Or not.
And I know that the rate cards that we get from title companies, they have different ones per county. Is there any particular reason the rates vary between counties as opposed to like one rate for all of Colorado?
Good question. That pretty much is a feature of how the economy is in each county. So different counties, you know, a remote county may not have such a high cost of living, prices may be much lower. One mystery to me though is that Boulder, which has a reputation for being a little pricier than Denver, actually has lower title insurance fees than Denver does.
And that's like cost per thousand, is that kind of what the way you guys think of it? So.
And it's, yeah, it's market driven. And title companies are not allowed to collude. We cannot talk to each other about our rates, but we can always look at each other's rates online anyway.
Sure,
So,
right.
but we cannot work with each other saying, hey, I'll raise my rates if you raise yours. We do not do that. And the Division of Regulatory Agencies definitely monitors that to make sure we're not violating it. I think you asked me the other day, approximately what does it cost? And you know, I can't be specific on that, but say a $500,000 sales price insured amount on a policy is probably going to range $1,500 to $1,800, give or take some, but could be discounted from that depending on that.
Okay. Now on costs, like in our Colorado contracts, there's a spot where it says, who's going to pay for title insurance for the owner's policy? And then the next sentence says about owner's extended coverage.
Oh, yes.
What is an owner's extended coverage? Could you explain that?
Yes. Our standard title insurance policy for an owner does not include coverage for things like mechanics liens, boundary violations, and that sort of thing. The lenders traditionally have always asked for that particular coverage, but it's a separate endorsement to the policy. So if an owner wants that, they can get the same coverage that the lender got for about $60 roughly. I'm going to say that's a median price on that as well, where they can get boundary protection and those sorts of things. However, the title company may or may not even provide that coverage depending on the property. If it's not a lot and block in a subdivision, then we will not probably issue that to an owner.
Unless there's a survey?
Unless
maybe?
there's a full-blown
Right.
survey.
Right.
Not just an improvement location
Right.
certificate, but sometimes, you know,
Okay.
well, each property bears looking at on its own.
Okay.
So you can determine that.
Now, one of the things that we've asked in some of our shows of lenders and realtors and such is the infamous TRID that took effect October 3rd. It sounds like a disease or something, so. Essentially, that's the disclosures that have changed and have been required now. How do you think the new TRID rules, well, do you want to explain what TRID is first of all? And then from a title company point of view, does that affect your business, or how do you see TRID as affecting what you do?
TRID stands for the Tilla Respa Integrated Disclosure.
And I'm very impressed that you got that.
Yeah, and as long as we're doing acronyms, we'll talk about the CFPB,
There
which
you
is
go.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And they are the ones who came up with the new TRID rules, which is a result of the meltdown we had in the last few years. So they're, again, another agency that's all about consumer protection. So they want to make sure that buyers or borrowers, specifically the consumer, has full knowledge of what they're borrowing, what the costs are, and they're going to know it far enough ahead of closing that they have no surprises when they walk in the door. And I personally feel like this new TRID documents, the changes in our settlement statements is a good thing, because I believe it will do that. It will be better disclosure. The only real downside is, other than us getting used to the new forms, that's a little challenging, but the downside is it may take a little longer from contract to closing, maybe 10 days or so, to allow time for all those disclosures to be met ahead of time.
Okay, and one of the things I hear that put fear in the hearts of most people involved in the business is getting HOA numbers, because a lot of HOAs, especially if there's only 4 units, are all run by volunteer organizations. You need the numbers. That person who has the numbers is on vacation in Hawaii in 2 weeks, and then the numbers for the HOA comes 24 hours before closing, and that has to be redisclosed because it's a cost. So again, any thoughts on that, or is that just something we're gonna have to try to figure out how to deal with?
You know, I think that we're still trying to figure out exactly how to do it, but what'll happen is we'll order documents earlier probably, which means then the seller might have made another payment in between the time that we got it till the time. So maybe we'll end up setting up some kind of escrows or something like that to pay HOA dues. That's a little challenging because obviously it's prorated between the seller and the buyer, and we may not have accurate prorations at closing. But I think as time goes, the homeowners associations will all understand the need for us to have their numbers and for them to be quick at responding to us.
I guess that's why they call this the practice of real estate. Every transaction we get a little better even after 40 years in the business. So.
Indeed. In fact, you know what, that's one thing that I have always loved about this business. In all these 44 years, I have never had a boring day. Every property is unique, every buyer and seller and every realtor, the combinations, so it's really an exciting business to be in.
Right. Any closing thoughts on title insurance?
Just that.
Just that, all right.
I think that's good.
Thank you, Terry, very much. Just the wealth of wisdom that you are about title insurance is amazing. I appreciate you being here and sharing that with our clients.
Thanks for inviting me, I appreciate it.
Dwayne Duggan, Remax Boulder Podcast, signing off.